Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. Today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Kung Fu Panda 4, Cabrini, and Imaginary all open up this weekend, so a pretty packed weekend at the box office with new wide releases. We haven't had one of these weekends in quite a long time, and there's been some decent performance at the box office for these films, including also a pretty strong second weekend showing for Dune Part 2. A lot of people are asking, though, is this film going to be able to perform in a similar way to Oppenheimer? How far off of that final result will it likely be? We do have some early indication of what's going on with that in its second weekend, and let's just say it's looking a lot better for Dune than it was even just last weekend. Of course, a big part of that being the fact that the weekly performances, the daily performances during the week have not been that strong compared to Oppenheimer, and because obviously the release date being in the summertime for Oppenheimer, also the Barbenheimer effect being a part of it, but in the weekend it has been able to, let's just say, take some ground or at the very least catch up a little bit. However, if you look at the overall numbers, Oppenheimer is still very much trending ahead and will probably still end up being the bigger box office, but still, Dune Part 2 is looking to be in a pretty strong position. The biggest factor hurting its box office chances, though, is the fact that it is mostly getting its money internationally, and it's also getting a huge chunk of that from China. As we all know, very little return on investment in international markets, and especially in China. Darn those commies. We also, of course, have just an update on the fact that Tony has either just not been doing his job or is taking the day off or whatever. Maybe he's preparing for the Oscars. I'm preparing myself for the Raven Awards tonight, Oscar Boycott Show, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Join us, have a lot of fun, find out the best films and worst films of 2023. Who will be Shill of the Year? Will Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers be able to win it 2 years in a row? We'll have to find out all those things later on. But this and tons of other things to talk about today. And before getting further, please make sure you smash that like button, line up that fire button over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So Tony was talking about the film getting up to $55 million in its opening weekend, Kung Fu Panda 4. Can't believe there's been 4 of those movies that have actually been made, whereas Dune Part 2 was trending towards around $44 million. But as I'd mentioned, he has not really had an update. I'm not finding his article anywhere as far as the write-throughs that he usually has, right? He has the Saturday numbers, and then he has the Sunday AM write-through. I'm wondering if he's getting ready for the Oscars. But we do have, of course, Becca over on Variety. What's going on, Bex? She has here saying, Kung Fu Panda 4 powers to $58 million debut. Dune 2 passes $150 million in the domestic market. It says, Universal and DreamWorks animated adventure Kung Fu Panda 4 topped the domestic box office, earning a solid $58 million. And so it's not even close between the second weekend of Dune Part 2 and this movie. Going into the weekend, it seemed like there would be a little bit more of a battle going on, but this film has taken the cake, and it makes sense. This is a film from a studio that a lot of parents trust. This is not a Disney situation where those films already are questionable, but then also a lot of parents are a little bit more wary about bringing their children to those movies because we know the kinds of stuff that they try to push in their properties, the kind of stuff they try to push in their content. We really don't have the same thing happening at the same level to any degree, really, it seems, from the likes of Universal or DreamWorks, and so it makes sense that this film is doing very well with the family demographic, $58.3 million there. It marks the biggest debut for the franchise since the original 2008 Kung Fu Panda, which was $60 million, unadjusted for inflation, overtaking the start of the 2 prior entries, Kung Fu Panda 3 at $41 million and 2011's Kung Fu Panda 2 at $47.6 million. One major caveat that needs to be added, not only is that adjustment for inflation number, which does tend to change things quite a bit, but also even if you take inflation and throw it out the window, if you take the average ticket price of that time, back in 2008, 2016, 2012, 2011, what you'll find is that there's probably still a lot more tickets that were sold, especially and guaranteed in the case of the first movie, but also even in the case of second and third movies too, because just think about how less a ticket was, almost half the price in certain ways, in certain markets, compared to what it is today. And so, therefore, it is still strong. We can't take that away from it. It did get the number 1 spot this weekend. It will likely make its money back based off of how it's tracking right now, but it always has to, of course, be brought back into reality for a second. Let's go ahead and go into the reality of the box office numbers. According to thenumbers.com, as you can see, Kung Fu Panda 4 as a new release got $58.3 million. That's around $14,000 per screen, so very strong showing there. Dune Part 2 also, though, holding strong. Week 2, after a major release, after a very big opening weekend, only dropped 44%. And so normally for bigger budget films, we tend to see drops in that, the 60% plus range. And so this is a very strong showing for the film domestically. It is still tracking a bit behind where Oppenheimer's domestic was, and so it'll be interesting to see whether this just continues on going forward, if this is just this first 2 weeks momentum, having premium format screens, people wanting to see this thing in IMAX versus in a regular theater. We, of course, will have to wait for probably another week or two before we find out the long-term ramifications of this, the legs of this film. But right now, this film is tracking to be somewhere in that $600 to $800 million range. As I was saying last weekend, these numbers seem to confirm that that is likely still going to happen. But is there that chance that it gets upwards to that $800+ million range? Again, we'll, of course, have to break that down as we get closer to the end of its release. Imaginary, though, opening to $10 million from Lionsgate. This is a horror film, a low-budget horror film, making $10 million. This is pretty much standard fare in the market today, so can't say it's really that impressive or that bad. It's a horror film. Seems like it's like the other horror films that have been released over the last few years. It just seems like they are always the same thing. In this case, I believe it has something to do with imaginary friends, or that there's a bear that gets possessed or something. And again, I feel like it's like, okay, we've gotten to the point of possessed toys now several times over, but hey, there's seemingly a market for it, and if you make the film for cheap enough, you can still make your money back and even make some profit to boot. The new film, Cabrini from Angel Studios, same director as Sound of Freedom. I got to see an early access copy of this. The review is posted over on Critic List, but this film was fantastic. I really enjoyed it a lot. It's getting a lot of weird backlash. For instance, I mentioned this on social media that Tony decided just to randomly come after the film, saying it's not going to get as much love from the QAnon and the right-wing audiences because there's nothing really in there to appease them. And I'm like, Tony, are you still trying to go off on this? It's not a good look for you to say the film about the reality of trafficking of children is somehow this fantasy or somehow this thing that's made up or politicized. It's kind of ridiculous, Tony. You look like a moron. So please stop. Anyway, get help. Cabrini, though, is a very solid film. $7.5 million in its opening. For a film like this, that's still very good. Remember, though, this film did cost around $50 million to make. There was a patron who was able to do some crowdfunding or some type of fundraising, I should say, trying to get people to support here and there. But overall, the cost of the movie was around $50 million. You kind of see that in the movie itself, though I will say it does have some artificial moments to it, especially with some of the backgrounds. It looks like there was green screen involved and things like that. But overall, I did enjoy it quite a bit. $7.5 million, though, is definitely something where it's strong for the kind of movie that it is. I wish it was a little bit stronger. We'll see if this film has any legs or if word of mouth is able to help it, but there is definitely a lot of people that are kind of holding back on this film, not only because you have the legs of people like Tony, who are going to hate it just because it happens to be a Christian movie or it happens to be made by people that are not of the same vein as he is, but you also have some others on more of the hard right, especially hard right Catholic members who are trying to claim that this is some type of feminist movie when in reality all that it's talking about is complementarity, about how men and women are indeed equal in dignity but have difference and function, and just how that plays out in a historical sense. So it's weird to me that is kind of the line that's being said about this movie. It doesn't have that kind of stuff in it. It's all based in truth, reality, and history, and it's a really inspirational story. Anyway, Bob Marley coming in the number 5 spot, $4 million there, a 45% drop. So hey, Bob Marley is still hanging around as well. Looking pretty good. I guess I can give an update on Madam Web dropping 64%, being dropped from over 1,000 screens, and so they've definitely given up on this movie. But did the film finally cross $100 million? Survey says 96.6. As I mentioned last week, I think it has a chance. Last week it was at $92 million. Now it's at 96. And of that extra money, about 1.1 was from this weekend specifically. Not a whole lot came from the weekend, so it's not making money here domestically, not making money here internationally. So it's still possible to get to $100 million, but we're talking about a film that will barely get over that amount, and it's still far off from making any profit. It's going to be still one of the worst performing films of all time, and especially of the modern era, the worst performing superhero movie in the modern times. So Kung Fu Panda 4, $80.5 million worldwide. So again, a pretty strong start for a film that costs around $85 million. Dune Part 2 is up to $367.5 million. Now, if you've been paying attention to the channel, you know I've already talked about this being compared to Oppenheimer. And so I will first say, all right, looking at these numbers domestically, Oppenheimer still has an edge. You'll notice that the second Saturday number for Dune Part 2 is actually a little bit higher than what it was for Oppenheimer, but Oppenheimer then was able to take back the Sunday, took also that Thursday, took also the Friday, the second Friday numbers. And what you're going to see is as the week goes on, that number right there of the second Monday, the second week numbers, Oppenheimer's is going to be just that much higher. And we know this just because, one, that film was tracking very well consistently all throughout. And though the tracking for Dune Part 2 is still doing well also, this film does not have the benefit of having those summer days when you have kids off from school, when you have people even off from work, especially teachers and other businesses that have summers off. And so I think that this is something that absolutely needs to be talked about and referenced because it's going to, I think, have an impact on what the film ends up actually ending to be. I will say this, though, because if you were paying attention, you know I mentioned, guess what? Oppenheimer, by week 2 of this release, around the same time, Oppenheimer had already gotten to $400 million worldwide. Now, I had said that I thought the film would probably only get to maybe $350 million or so. Turns out it's getting a lot better than that. Again, as I'd mentioned before, $367 million. So it's not too far off, right? It's not too far off at all where the film Oppenheimer was at the point of its release. But as I'd mentioned, also, this, as far as the box office, as far as profits are concerned, a lot of this money is coming from overseas, right? And so we have, of course, here numbers, not even really, according to the numbers at least, nothing being reported from China is set to have been released actually today in China. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. But even so, $210 million, again, 40% of that actually goes back to the studio. And so whether the film as a film is going to be profitable or not is still in the kind of that question mark area. The only benefit is that it's made this much money without China. Of course, any film, any money they make from China is basically just going to be a bunch of fool's gold because, as we all know, you get barely any return on that investment. But we'll do a fuller breakdown of that once those China numbers come out, and also once this film gets further along in the release. Based on these numbers, though, we're projecting this film, again, probably in that $700+ million territory at this point in time. The film Imaginary, again, I see a creepy bear with blood. Okay, so it's a possessed bear. Meet Chauncey. He's not imaginary, and he's not your friend. Oh, okay, so another possessed doll. From the same people that brought you Megan, a story about a possessed doll. Or Five Nights at Freddy's, the same story that brought you possessed animatronics. Kind of like dolls, but still. I don't quite understand the appeal, but I know that there's appeal out there. Cabrini at $7.5 million, again, very strong film, and I think it's well worth your time and your money, especially if you are Catholic or Christian. And Bar Melly One Love, $160 million, again, looking pretty good at this point, especially based off of where it originally was in the very beginning. All right, now going to do some charts because we love doing charts here over on OMB Reviews. Sorry, some of the numbers we're not updating there, and so luckily I've already put those in. My goodness, I've lost my train of thought. I'm just so excited for the Ravens tonight. Watch the Ravens tonight, guys, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. Anyway, so opening weekend of Imaginary being $10 million. Based off of typical trends, the film probably will end somewhere around $30 million on average. So it could be a little less than that. It could be a little bit more than that. Cabrini, based on those same numbers, means the film would end somewhere around $20+ or so million. So it could be a bit more, could be a bit less, depends on how the legs are. That's going to be a far cry from where it needs to be to break even because of that massive budget. Kung Fu Panda 4, $80.5 million, likely will end somewhere around maybe $220 to $250 million worldwide, which would be over its break-even point. And I think that this film will probably end up having some pretty strong legs and will probably end up performing better than the average film. So Kung Fu Panda 4 probably will make its money back. We, of course, will update that once we have those week 2 numbers. As you all know, those are the most important numbers for having a pretty good gauge of where a film will end up. We do have those second weekend numbers, though, for Dune Part 2. And so at $367 million, remember that Oppenheimer was at $400 million, and that film actually ended up overperforming compared to historical trends. And so could we see something similar with Dune? We might. Again, still too early to tell at this point, but right now things are looking pretty good. If the film has a typical box office, though, if it has a massive drop-off after this week, which does not seem likely, then the max would be around $525 million. And if it doubled what it's made so far, which means it had an insane run at the box office, it could go up to $735. And so on average, that would be roughly around $630 million is what I project the film to make when everything is said and done. Now, we don't have any numbers coming out of China for this movie, and so that, again, is obviously going to have an impact on what that final box office total will be. But remember, just because you have a higher box office from China, because of that much lower return on investment, that actually ends up making it a little bit more difficult to break even, because that film, you only get 25% of the China box office. Based off of these numbers, though, that we have right now, $30 million to $156 million in net gain profits. This is, of course, using more of a traditional understanding understanding of how break-evens work. If you take into account, though, that 40% cut from the international markets, if you use my RCC method, my random crazy chart method, that means that this film probably has not yet gotten to a break-even point still, and also has a ways to go. And so these projections probably would be a lot lower using those metrics. And I'll try and do a fuller analysis of this over on my article at geeksandgamers.com, which should be posting either later today or sometime tomorrow if I have time to work on it. Ravens, of course, drive me crazy. And of course, the kids. Gotta love the kids, but it is definitely hard to find some time to do these things. And so anyway, those are the numbers currently. Let's go ahead and get some updates on any of the other films that we've been talking about. Madam Web at $96 million, still $92 million in the red. And again, that's being very conservative. Bob Marley is around $8 million in the red. So as I mentioned previously, this film looks like it might be able to break even. At best, though, at worst, it's going to be a very small loss. And I think that's definitely a better thing for them going into the initial weekends. There was not seemingly going to be a lot of hope for the film. Turns out the film was able to perform pretty well down the line. Lisa Frankenstein is still a flop. Argyle still also a massive, massive flop. Also was not able to get to $100 million worldwide either. And those are currently the numbers as they stand. And so what are y'all's thoughts on the box office? Have you seen Kung Fu Panda 4? Have you seen Imaginary, Cabrini? Are those films any good? Where do you think that these films are going to end up in the long run? I think Kung Fu Panda 4 right now seems like it has enough momentum where it will probably be a pretty successful film. But also for Dune Part 2, do you think the film is going to get to $650 million, $750 million? Right? Based off of these trends right now, I think $700 million would be a more likely scenario, better than the average, but not necessarily the highest number either. I think a lot of these tickets are still coming from those premium format screens, and so that obviously can have a pretty big impact on your bottom line. So what will happen when you do have bigger films coming out? We do have big films coming out over the next couple of weeks. You have films like the next Godzilla film. You have the next Monsterverse film. You've also got the new Ghostbusters film coming out. So those are going to start to take up space, especially in these premium screens, but also in the space that is currently being dominated by Dune as far as the type of audience that goes to see said movie. Still very good numbers nonetheless. Can't say otherwise for that. And again, also strong numbers for these other films. And I have to once again say, go see Cabrini. It's a very, very good film. And especially if you have any young daughters, I think that this would be a great film to watch as well, because I think it gives a great example of what true femininity actually looks like. But anyway, what else thoughts on this? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, line up that fire button, Aussie Festival Rumble button as well. Make sure you check out the Raven Awards tonight on this channel, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be live on YouTube, Odyssey, and Rumble. And also, if you want to partake in my Ravens Bowling, where if you predict the correct winners of the categories that we are announcing tonight, if you have the highest score, the 3 highest scores will have a chance to win some 4Ks, Blu-rays, Steelbooks, things like that. I'm still trying to put together the actual prize list, but it will be 4K titles, it will be Steelbook titles, it will be premium awards. And so if you want a chance of winning that, go ahead and check out my socials over on Twitter. Check out the community tab here on YouTube to get that link, and that way you have access to give it a shot. Anyway, you guys are all amazing, and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Latari Sunday, and as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members for the month of March, starting off with Father Luca Illich, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel being Eagle Rider. Miss Mon Muses, check out her YouTube channel as well by the same name. Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name. Mr. Roy and the K-Man, check out the K-Man's website at xtheboundaries.co. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, or if you want your name listed at the end of every live stream and video, make sure to check out the top link in the video description on how you can find out where to join on Patreon, Subscribestar, YouTube channel memberships, pretty much anywhere that you can think of that you would have as a mainstream source to be able to support the channel. You have the means to do so, and you get also special perks like having access to an exclusive podcast that I do every single month, access to a giveaways channel that I host on my Discord channel, and also, of course, the ability to have your channel shouted out at the end of every single live stream. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.